So, welcome to General Biology 1. And today we'll be talking about the cell theory. All right. You've already learned about the cell even when you were in grade school. It has been around for a long time, the concept of it. And you know that cells are, when you are asked, like, what is a cell? You would probably say it is the basic unit of life. As easy as that. But what does that mean? Okay, so cells, think of them as the foundations of you. You are a living organism. And then, unsa man jud ang ato ang pinaka smallest unit ever, no? If all things are composed of atoms, may it be living or non-living things, what about for living things exclusively? No, so living things, all of us, are animals, plants, kita tanan, no? Even bacteria. We are all made up of cells. So think of them as your foundation. Without the cell, there will be no you. Charot. So in anak, so think of it like, if you're going to think of it as an analogy, like unsa man ang ako ang role ani nga universe nga gamay ra man kaayo ko nga butang, no? I'm just a teeny tiny human versus the whole universe. Remember what makes up the universe? It's you and all the things in it, no? So if wala ka, then there will be, the universe will not be whole. Charat! Sana all! Okay. Hadlok kayo si ma'am. Uy, mga mag-Valentine's Day pagihapon. So, mo na inyong hirit sa inyong mga kumanguyab mo, ha. Kumanguyab mo na inyong hirit. You are my universe, charot. So that is the significance of cells, no? So cells are very important because that is basically the cell is basically the distinguishing factor between living and non-living cells. So my next question is, how can one distinguish living organisms from non-living or entities? Or how would you know that you are alive? Oh, saan ni mo pakabalo nga ang usa ka butang kay buhi na siya? Okay? Anyone? Any answers? Yes, Arnold?
Kuan ma'am kanang if kanang ang tanan living things kay gakaon ga-grow
Kaon
ga-reproduce
ka
and
grow.
ang non-living things din ma'am kay dili ga-grow. Or ang ano ito ma'am?
All right. So let's use that. Growth and development. Good. No? So actually, duha ka buo ka characteristics of life ay mong gi-mention ka ganina. Giyon ka nga nag-grow ang things, and also for them to grow, things ba yun? Sorry, living things. And for them to grow, they will need to eat. No? So in that case, we have energy processing. Ga-process ang imong living things og energy. So, growth and development, what's the difference between growth and development? When you say growth, it has something to do with your physical being. Pay mo sa water kamay. Uy, Arnold, are you related to Ma'am Jinky Bernasor? Or
No,
dili? Dili di
wala.
ay. Okay. Anyways, if your classmates are curious, Ma'am Jinky Bernasor is a university nurse. That's why I had to ask. Maybe you were related. Okay, growth is something to do with your physical being. Like for example, growth in height. Like nagtaas ka, growth in girth. Naglapad ka, nana ang growth, no? Development is something to do with your skills, no? Your fundamental skills. Like for example, when you were born, when you were a baby, the way that we hold things, if you're not aware, na may mga manghod na mga baby, na may mga pagumangko na baby pa, you will observe that the way that they grasp things is they grasp it palmarly or palmar using their palms, like inana just lang mag-grasp, so wah ano di ba kadang, if you notice ka ng mga baby, they love yanking your hair, like naon niya, or i-yank na imong face, inaana ang mga babies, no, because they're still mastering the way that they grasp things, and that is through their palms. And as they progress, as they age, and as they become from infants to toddlers, um, they will learn how to grasp things sophisticatedly. So, sa una, using their palms, eventually they will use their fingers na dayon. And that's your pincer grasp, no? That is development. That's how living things, that's one of the characteristics of living things, that is growth and development. Another is energy processing. The way that we process energy, as what Arnold says, we need to eat, right? Now, not when you talk about plants, they don't eat. They don't eat, but they do process, or they do make their own quote unquote food. No, they do make their own glucose or fructose, depending what kind of sugar that is, and that is through photosynthesis. No, this process is very uniquely done by plants, but also not only by plants actually, but there are also other organisms that perform this energy processing. And kita ang mga humans, kita ng mga animals, we process energy. Actually, ginabuhat sa di sa plants. No, we process what we eat. So we are we eat in bulk, like mukhaon ta ang, di ba? That's bulk eating. So we eat by bulk, and then we process that, and we get the energy from that, the glucose from that, and convert that to something that we know, or something our cells recognize as energy, and that TP. So mo na atong living things, no, they are able to process energy. Okay. So we have growth and development and energy processing. What else? Any other characteristics of life? You can answer to the chat if maulaw mo. Do not be shy. Any other characteristics of life? How will you know that that is a living thing? Reproduce, ma'am. Yes, that's correct, Rafael. No, our living things, they are able to reproduce, and that is the characteristic of life, very important characteristic of life, and that is reproduction. Nganong kailangan man to mag-reproduce? Why do we need to reproduce? Anyone? Anyone? Why do we need to reproduce? Ano kailangan mo dito mga anak, no? Naadyo tayo, mga bibi. Dapat na ay mga tatlo. May tatlong bibi akong nakita. Yes, Juniel.
Para ano po ma'am, kanang like, di ba ang halos tanan maging living things, maging tendency nga mamatay. So, kailan niya mag-reproduce ma'am, para bitaw marag dili mahurot bitaw ang inato nga kuan nga
Very
organism
good.
po.
Correct. That's basically what reproduction is for. It is for the survival of species. Without reproduction, we cannot ensure the survival of our species, and that is the Homo sexual. I'm just kidding. I am laughing at myself. I'm sorry. Okay, our own species, or ilang own species, and ang goals of reproduction is not to make ourselves extinct. That's it. Mo na jud na siya ang goal ni reproduction, no? Um, any other? Ano pa di ay? Okay, sensitivity to response, correct. Or, asa akong pen? Or, yeah, we'll just write it that. Sensitivity to response, or response to stimuli. You can write it as that, response to stimuli. There are many things that are considered to be stimuli in the environment. No, there are a lot. Like for example, if it's too cold, no, if bugnaw ra sad kaayo, what are you gonna do? Are you just gonna stand there and not do anything? Of course not. Remember kita mga human beings, no, we have a core body temperature, or we are required to have a core body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. If it goes 1 degree beyond that, or a degree below that, there will be something wrong with your body, you know? And our bodies will tend to respond to that. So if it's very cold, we start shivering. No, we start shivering. Why? Because we need to raise our temperature so that mo balik siya sa iyahang pagka 37 degrees Celsius core body temperature nato. So with the shaking action of shivering, we are producing heat, thus increasing our core body temperature. What if it is very hot? No, what about if it's too hot? Of course, when it's too hot, that's higher than that of your core body temperature. You need to lower it down. And how do we do that? Kita ng mga tao, we have our sweat glands to thank for. You know, we start to sweat, and with the water being on the surface of our skin, that eventually cools us down. Nana siya. So that is response to stimuli. Response to the environment important for the survival of things. Okay, so that is response to stimuli. Any other characteristic? There are approximately like 7 of them. Yes, Juniel.
Metabolism po, ma'am.
Metabolism, or in this case we have regulation, no, because metabolism is part of regulation. That's correct, Juniel. So regulation, yes, Rafael.
To be able to adapt in the environment, ma'am.
Adapting to their environment, yes, that is basically responding to stimuli. Wala siya. All right, so when you say regulation, there are ang all-encompassing mood gaining regulation. There are a lot of things that we regulate in our bodies alone. Like for example, temperature, no, blood sugar levels nato, our hormone levels, etc., etc. So your living things are able to regulate. Like for example, katong giingon ka ganina, that we have a core body temperature to maintain. There are things in our bodies that have normal values, and that being living things, with us being living things, we are able to regulate that. So that's regulation. Okay, napa ba? Another is actually related lang siya sa regulation, no, kanang imong homeostasis, meaning i-normalize niya tanan ang naa sa imong body. I-normalize niya or i-maintain niya sa normal levels, no? Naa siya yung mga coping mechanisms. Just like for example, if you have a high blood sugar, dalon ni with the help of your hormone insulin, dalon niya ang sugar from your blood to your cells so that mubaba dadto sa blood pero musaka sa cells so that our cells can utilize that. Or if bubo rasad kaayo ang imong blood sugar and then you haven't eaten yet, ang buhaton ni hormone glucagon, lahi sa siya ng hormone, no? Si glucagon, dalon niya imuhang sugar stores from your liver to the bloodstream. So inana ang homeostasis. It's like maintaining balance. Same gyapon siya, very similar. So what to the example that I gave you on sensitivity to response. All right, and then last one. We are made up of cells. Yes, na-establish ito na Angel. But what makes living things living things? That's a question right there. Honeybee, I love your name. Honeybee. To interact. Okay? The ability to interact to other living organisms. Yeah? Yeah. Uh-huh. That is also sensitivity. That's also under sensitivity to response. Any other? Like for example, I'll give you an example, okay? So a long time ago, I think you've heard of this, that kanang kita daw mga human beings were very much related to apes, no? Di ba naana siya? Or we came from apes, which is wrong, no? The Darwinian kana siya nga kanang misinterpretation of the Darwinian concept of evolution. That's already debunked, no? So we did not come from apes. It's just that us and the chimpanzees or the apes, we come from the same grand great grandfather mother na atay commonality, and then eventually kuno, this is from the hypothesis, which this is from the cognitive, I forgot what hypothesis is, but definitely it's you can search this up somewhere in Google. But according to this hypothesis, it states that um we and the chimpanzees that we know now, we have a common ancestor, and that ancestor um used to live up in the trees. Okay, up in the trees man ng mga apes nimo and monkeys, no? So for them to survive. Kaya naman ng mga predators on the ground, no? Eventually, as time went by, some of these, our long lost ancestors, some of them went down, kay nakulangan ang nakuha na tingali, ning baba na ang number of predators, ning naog sila sa ground, and some of them stayed up there up in the trees, no? So katong mga what do you call this? Katong mga ato ang mga great ancestors nga naasa up in the trees, eventually they developed really good memorization and hearing skills para makasurvive sila against predators. Kita nga kato dayong ningnaog dayon sa ground, kita dayon to. We developed the skill of language, no? We developed sophisticated language and communication to survive. So lahi ato ang survival skills. But still, that's the main goal. We need to survive. So what do you call that? What is that characteristic? Like as time goes by, nag-change ang ato ang and dana siya so that we can survive. What characteristic is that? Ryan says revolution. Tangtanga lang ang letter R, Ryan. That is evolution. Ayan. So, that's correct. No? So, that's sorry. Sala, di Ryan, revolution. Ano ko na yun? Evolution. So, all living things are able to evolve. For what purpose? For survival. So, all of these things, all of these characteristics, they enable us living things to survive. That's it. That's the main goal of this. Okay. Evolution lagi Ryan. Oh, batay lang jud ka. Evolution. All right. So, let's talk about the cell. The cell is very small. No? Ang cell nato is very small, especially the things that are composed of the cell, things that are inside the cell, and things that these organelles, kinang mga organelles na inside the cell, are composed of pa jud. They're so small. So, why do you think cells are very small? Anong gamay kay ang cells? What do you think? That's a question. Anybody? Why is it that our smells that our cells na noon are very small? Ano di ba pwede nga dako? Ano man? Like ostrich egg kadako or chicken egg kadako. Why is it like that? Anybody? Any idea? Ano?
Kuan ma'am, kana because they need to be able to get the nutrient and the waste out quickly, ma'am.
All right. And how is that possible? Like, how is that possible? Of course, sige lang. That's okay. Okay. So, the surface, matod pa ni Atin, the surface area to the volume ratio gets smaller as the cell gets larger. Yes, it has something to do with the surface area and the volume, the ratio between the two. But ano na dyan siya? Analysis lang nimo. Nganong gamay kay ang cells? Because if dako kayo sila, no? If dako kayo ang cells, it would take a lot of time. It would take a long time for it to process some things. Like for example, mas dugay ang cell division. Kay dako man siya. So, daghan pa siya adjustments, no? So, kung inana, kung dako siya, dugay na siya mag cell division. So if you have like like for example, di ninyo maklaro no, but I have a lot of scratches on my arms because yeah, I got wounded. But to think it kanang naa kay mga samad sa imong arms or sa imong skin, it would take a lot longer for it to heal because your cells are too big, dugay ka siya magmitosis. So ina na siya. Another is that if cells are very big, it will take them a long time to process energy. So basin hinay dingi ka, ooh, ooh, ana ka, ooh, ana. Think of the colossal titan. Think of the colossal titan. It's a huge, huge guy, right? But of course, because he is very big, dako sad ang iyang cells. So tungod kay dako iyang cells, hinay mag-process og energy. Maunang si Armin, igo na siya mo transform, plak! Gabi kay na energy ang gi-release, pero kadyot na kay siya din, dahil na kay siya mo-tire out, right? Oh, because it takes a long time for the colossal titan cells to produce more energy. So munang ano na din siya. Tulog na din balik si Armin. Oh, so think of the cells if they're very big, that would be the case. Umusad lang si Reiner, si Armored Titan, because of his size, smaller maka siya, no? Considerably smaller than the Colossal Titan. Pero siya maka run, like si Annie. Pak. Ana. So, in ana siya. So, think of it that way. But, majorly, ang major reason is the surface area and the volume ratio, they are kuan. So ayun siya, small. I forgot what I was gonna say. Smaller size has higher surface area to volume ratio. Okay. So kung mas gamay, mas daghan. Okay? So kung mas daghan cells ang mag-process og mga stuff. So faster sa imong responses. The faster the responses, the faster the production of stuff. Ina na siya. So that is the genius of our cells, no? So kung naabay God, I don't know if there's a God, I don't know. Kung believe mo God, go. I honestly don't know if we do have a God, but the more that you study science, the more that you will realize nga, amazing you get ng design, no? Who designed us? Charot. Okay. So we don't know. God has no gender, so we don't really know. I haven't seen him, her. I don't know. So yeah, thank you so much for that design. That is genius. Okay. So the cells are able to do the following things. Your cells are able to regulate internal environment. So we talked about this already, sa characteristics. So I will not expound on that. The cells are able to acquire and also utilize energy. So acquisition as in like getting it from the food that we eat, but in the case of plants, they are getting it from through the process of photosynthesis, and we're able to utilize that energy, that glucose, into energy by converting it to ATP, an energy source that our cells are able to recognize. And then our cells are able to respond to the environment, of course, or our cells are able to respond to stimuli. And then lastly, our cells are for protection and support. No? So imagine na wala mo cells, wala mo skin cells, wala tay support dito sa ta muscle, mura taog titan, no? Dito ta muscle, ew. So without the cells, we are not properly protected and supported. So I won't talk about this anymore because we talked about this now. All right, so let's go to the cell theory. So whatever scientific theory there is, there are people behind it. There are many people. Dili pwedeng usa lang ka buok ang behind another theory. There will be many people behind it. It could be that there will be people agreeing with one another, supporting one another's clauses or supporting one another's claims, or there will be people that are disagreeing with one another, or they are disproving one another. So in ana ka dynamic ang scientific community, no? So let us begin with Zacharias Janssen. So Zacharias Janssen, it is believed that he invented the first primitive microscope, but then it was later discovered that before pa lang kang Zacharias Janssen, there were already like primitive microscopes. The thing about Zacharias Janssen was that he was the one who popularized it. Siya ang nagpasikat sa use of the primitive microscope. It was like during this time in the 15 to early 1600s. If you want to be, because a lot of people sa una kay they want to be scientists, like want to be scientists. So if you want to be a scientist or if you want to be someone important in your community, then this is the gadget to have, and that is your primitive microscope. So think of Zacharias Janssen as your Steve Jobs, inana. So siya na pasikat sa iPhone, sa what do you call the iPad? I forgot what it's called. Okay, so he he was the person who designed those things, so and he's the person behind Apple. So siya said maayo sad siya mo market kay ngano Apple mo jud ang mangitaon sa mga people, no? Ngano Apple mo jud ang gusto paliton sa people, even if the Android basically they're the same. They're just smartphones, no? So siya ang nagpasikat na. So think of Zacharias Janssen as your olden time, olden time, Steve Jobs. All right. So with the popularization of your primitive microscopes, of course, again, a lot of your wannabe scientists needed to have it. It was a gadget to have. And then one of these people was Antoine van Leeuwenhoek. There are actually like a lot of variations to his name, like Antoine, or Anthony. I am honestly very confused as but what I learned way back, or even my research, it's really Antoine. So kulang is og I, Antoine. So see Antoine van Leeuwenhoek in these years, no. Um, he was actually very curious. Yeah, he was a rich guy, and he was actually very curious about the things around him. So one of the things that he observed under the microscope was actually his tartar. Tartar, ma'am, ki sa ngipon, no? Ano siya, unsa ka ni ki na to? Nataan na to, ano ba talaga ang nandito? Ano siya? So, he got that sample under the microscope. So inani naman good ang kuan sa una, no, primitive microscope. No, it's very simple. It's handheld. It's not the same as what we have now, which is very complex and it has a lot of functions, etc., etc. So he was able to observe his tartar, and then he noticed that there were like tiny animal-like stuff under the microscope, and because of their appearance, he called them animalcules. Okay. Later on, we realized the scientific community realized that these were actually the animalcules were actually your bacteria, no, and some protozoa. So that is why Anton van Leeuwenhoek is actually he's actually like he's actually dubbed as like um not really the father of, but one of the foundations of bacteriology and protozoology. Ano siya. So mo nang gitawag niya animalcule. So how far he has gone centuries later. So that's Anton van Leeuwenhoek. And then Antoine had a friend, no? Na siya friend, the contemporary niya, ano siya nga, look at my discoveries. I discovered animalcules. And then ang iyang friend kay si Robert Hooke. Ayan, kay contemporaries man na sila, no? So, yun na yung si Robert Hooke na friend. Friend, tanawa ko, friend, amazing kaya ako na discover under the microscope. How about you? Naa ba kay kuan? Naa ba kay input? So, ano siya nga, iyan nagipadala ang iyahang, nado siya gipadala nga handheld microscope kang Robert Hooke. So, at sa, but gipadala niya because Anton van Leeuwenhoek is Dutch, no? He was in he was in the Netherlands, and Robert Hooke is from or was from England. So ano siya nga, oy Robert, tanawa sa niyo. Siya, sige, tanawa sa, I want to observe things too. Ano siya. So one of the things that he observed was actually a cork. You know, a cork, kanabitong pang sana siya kanang cover bitaw sa wine bottle, kana siya cork. So he was able to observe the cork under the microscope, and then he noticed nga in ani nga observation no may magubog drawings si Robert Hooke. So amazing kaayo siya og kanang observations iya yung ipang draw. So this is what he observed. It's like tiny matod pa niya mura siya og mga selda sa prisuhan or selda sa imong monastery or sa imong basta din ha selda kung asa gatulog ang mga pari ug mga nuns, no? That's why he called it cells, no? Actually siya ang nagdub sa word nga cells, or siya ang nagdub sa cells as cells. So that was Robert Hooke, and then he discovered na wait, nara yung mga stuff din they look like cells from the monastery or from some kind of church. So mo nang gitawag din niya cells, and as Robert Hooke. And then years later, there was Francesco Redi, no? The concept of cells has been around for quite some time already, and he actually there were actually like debates na nganong buan man jud ka nang lagi ka ng maggots ana mo na iyang mga mo na mga questions at a time sa mga people around him, and then he wanted an answer. So he was actually one of the contributing scientists sa cell theory, because he actually proved that spontaneous generation does not happen. No, dili kalit mo to nga si magot out of nowhere. So he was able to do this kining siyang experiment wherein he took in a slab of meat, and then he put it in a jar, and then naiusa nga covered, naiusa nga dili, and then naiusa nga lightly covered. So it was discovered niya through his experiment, very simple experiment by the way. He discovered that if it remained open, na ay magots, no? So there was life in that. But if it is closed, your flies cannot come in, so there will be no presence of maggots. And if it is slightly covered, just like using your gauze, there will be maggots there. Kaya dato mas attract, no? So that's it. That's Francesco Redi's experiment. And then years later, like a century later, by the way, like 2 centuries to be exact, we have Matthias Schleiden. So he was in Germany, and he was observing with his microscope, he was observing plants exclusively. And then he came to the conclusion that all of the plants that he observed, they were made up of cells. And then he wrote a letter to his contemporary, that's Theodor Schwann, also from Germany, but on the other side of Germany, who was also observing a lot of animals and through the microscope, no? And then he discovered that all the animals that he observed had cells, no? So sila nag-shake hands din si Schleiden o si Schwann, ano sila nga, uy, kung ang plants kay composed of cells and ang animals kay composed of cells, maybe all living things are composed of cells. So that's Schleiden and Schwann, or Schwann and Schleiden. And then years later, we have Robert Remak and Rudolf Virchow, who said na, uy, I love your research. Schleiden and Schwann, we love your research. And then we found out I think we can conclude that these cells, they don't come from nowhere, no? They have to come from somewhere. Like your animals need to come from cells. Or to be exact, kung kita mga tao, no? We have to come from the cells of our biological parents, our female mother and our male father. So dapat ay egg cell and sperm cell. So maybe all cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay. But there's actually controversy here, actually. Okay. Sa una magud si Rudolf Virchow, he was the only one credited aning concept no sa cell theory. Later on, they discovered that Rudolf Virchow actually the work of Robert Remak, but of course plagiarized. But then he added more information, so that's why dili gyapon mawala si Rudolf Virchow. So there are 3 fundamental principles of the cell theory that we know of. Principle number 1 is that every living organism consists of 1 or more cells. And I think we know that already. So all of us, kita mga tao, we're composed of cells. Your plants are composed of cells, etc., etc. And then the second principle states that the cell is a fundamental unit of life. Without the cell, then there will be no life at all. It is the smallest unit and the most fundamental unit. All of us are composed of cells, really, really tiny cells. And the third principle states that cells come from pre-existing cells. So, dili pre-di ning sprout lang ta out of nowhere. All right? So, there should be a source of the cells. Dili pre-di. Now, in the modern cell theory, there are three more principles added. So, continuing from the third, the fourth principle is hereditary information is passed from the cell. And we know, usa gali ang hereditary information na to, asa gikan? What do you call that molecule that has our kuan? Hereditary information? What do you call that? It has three letters. Muna yung acronym. Anyone?
DNA, ma'am.
Our DNA. Very good, no? So in this case, that will be our DNA. Now, the fifth concept is all cells have the basic chemical composition. So same ratang tanan, no? All of us are organic beings. Let me drink some water a little bit. All of us are organic beings. The living organisms, at least diri sa earth, no, so we are carbon based, so all of us have a base of carbon tang tanan. So natin carbon, natin hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, all those elements are part of our life. So actually mao na siya ang atong pinaka kung ano mga elements nga dara magdepend ang atong life, ang atong cells dara magdepend. And then number 6, that energy flow occurs within the cells. So this talks about one of the characteristics of life, and that is energy processing, wherein we know that we are able to ingest, or we are able to take in our energy source, and that is glucose, no, that is also true for your plants, but they produce it on their own through photosynthesis, and then we're able to process that, and we're able to produce a kind of energy that our cells are able to recognize, and that is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Do not worry about that if that is unfamiliar to you. You have learned that in junior high, but I think you just forgot, no? If that is unfamiliar to you, do not worry, because we will learn more about ATP in the fourth grading. So there is energy flow in your cells. There's electricity in your cells, especially in your nerve cells. Huh? So that is the modern cell theory. So, Karon said, modern times come with modern equipment. So we have electron microscopes now. We do still have the compound microscopes, but of course, high-tech na karon no, na anatay electron microscopes that are able to magnify 500,000 times, no? So makakuan siya. Why are they called electron microscopes? Is because they use electrons, no? These electron microscopes have magnets that can manipulate your electrons to target like a specific area in what you are magnifying. Okay, if you're just using your compound microscope, it can only magnify until 500x, no? Mo na siyang simple nga compound microscope that you can find in high school biology laboratories. But if you have like a lot of money and your laboratory has a lot of money to buy electron microscopes, then this is what you're gonna see. Na siya amazing, okay, no? Even the smallest stuff. Okay, let's check up if you learned something from our lesson ganina. All right. Below are 5 of the contributions to the development of the cell theory. Identify the scientists described in each of the following items. Number 1. He was the first to observe the cells under the microscope. Who's this?
Robert Hooke, ma'am.
Robert Hooke. Very good. Okay. Robert Hooke. If maula mo, you can also type in the chat box, ha. For the rest of you nga dili mag-unmute, type in the chat box, okay? Number 2, his experiment disproved the spontaneous generation theory.
Francisco ready, ma'am.
Okay, so this is ready. Are you ready? Yes, I'm just kidding. All right, so this is Francesco Reddy. Number three, he proposed that the cell is the basic unit of plants and animals. There are actually two people behind this. Who were those two people? Yes, Janelle.
Mateus Kelinde, what do you know? Mateus Skeladin and Theodore Kawan, ma'am.
Schwann. Okay, that's
Swan.
Schleiden and Schwann.
Yes,
Ayan.
ma'am.
Okay, so that is Schleiden and Schwann. They have the same concept, and they concluded together that uh, uh, all things, no, all living things are composed of your cell. Number four, he stated in the cell theory that all organisms are made up of cells. This is actually the same as before. So this is still Schwann and Schleiden. You don't have to answer. Kaya na-answeran mo ni ganina, no? And the last one, he proposed the idea in the cell theory that cells come from pre-existing cells.
Rudolf Virchow.
Rudolf Virchow, and there's another guy.
Robert Remak, ma'am.
Okay, Robert Rimac. So we have Rimac and Virchow. All right. Correct. All right. Thank you very much for your answers. Let's continue. Right. Let's go to the components of the cell. But we will just, for this morning, we will just tackle the bacteria cell, and we will continue to the animal and the plant cell tomorrow. Okay. So that you can prepare prepare yourselves. So I hope that you have already downloaded the PDF files that I have posted in your Google Classroom. Mao dyan na atong source of atong source of information. The slides that I'm using are modified, so ni siya ka modified slides ni sila. They are not very similar to the ones that to the PDF files that I've given, because I have gotten rid of some details kay para when I do the lecture I can write and write until I die, or I can add more information. Okay, so yeah, please be advised. But again, na-add to atong source of information, the PDF files. All right. So, ang atong cells are very dynamic, no? Although they're very, very small, they are composed of a lot of things, like a lot of things, a lot of elements, very chosen few elements, or the elements that are considered to be like the most essential of life. You have your carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and naka-mention naman ko nitrogen, no? Oh, mara to siya. Kana sila. They're the most fundamental because all of our cells have that. Our DNA has that as well. So, mauna siya ang ato ang cells. So, in the three domains of life, do you remember the three domains of life? Three domains. There are three domains of life, no? Mauna siya ang pinaka top of the hierarchy when you talk about the hierarchy of life. So you have three domains. You have your eukarya.
Bacteria, ma'am.
Okay. You have your bacteria, correct? And then?
Saan yung archaea?
Eukaryote, ma'am.
Archaea.
Archaea. Okay. So you have your archaea. Okay. When you say eukarya, what does that mean? What are, or eukaryotes, that's what you call them. What are eukaryotes? You can answer in the chat if you want. Yes, Ryan.
And ma'am, eukaryote is an organism consisting of a cell or cells in which the genetic material is DNA in the form of chromosomes contained within a distinct nucleus.
Mm. Or basically, when you talk about the difference of eukarya versus the rest of them, the bacteria and the archaea, when you talk about it in the context of domains of life, no, eukarya are, yes, that's correct. So Joniel, no, these are beings that have cells with membrane-bound organelles. That's what it means. Membrane-bound organelles. Meaning, naa siya'y nucleus, naa siya'y mitochondrion. Are those names familiar from junior high? Naa siya'y endoplasmic reticulum, naa siya Golgi body, a lot of organelles, no? Naa siya mga organelles. So, mo na dyan na siyang essence ng eukarya. They can be, the eukaryotes can be, what do you call this? They can be single-celled organisms, like they exist as only one cell, or they can be multicellular organisms. So, kita, mga human beings, we are part of the domain eukarya. Okay. Bacteria and archaea, both of them are prokaryotes. Ano sa'yo pasabot sa prokaryotes? What's the difference? What's the difference? What is a prokaryote fundamentally? Anyone?
Organisms whose cells lack a nucleus, ma'am, or other organelles.
Okay, so prokaryotes are basically just opposite of your eukaryotes, no? They don't have no membrane-bound organelles, no? Bound organelles. They don't have the nucleus, they don't have the mitochondrion, you don't have that at all. They only have like DNA and a few ribosomes, and then that's it. That's in what's inside their cell. So those are prokaryotes. Now, even if they sound very simple, they do, right? But what's amazing about your bacteria and archaea because is that your scientists think that, I didn't think there's evidence. There is evidence that these are or they are the very first form of life here on Earth, no? Everything started out with your bacteria and archaea, or maybe gani ay mong archaea. Archaea are thought to be like, because they can withstand like the worst kinds of situation or not situations but conditions, like the hottest places. They can be found in the hottest places, they can be found in the coldest places as well, or the most hostile of places, like they can be found in like sulfur filled waters. Basta inana siya. Archaea are thought to be like the ancient ones. They have been around for a long time. Bacteria and archaea, they're quite similar to one another, but again, they differ in the sense that your archaea are really ancient. Mo na siya, no? So they are prokaryotes. They exist as only one cell, and they don't have organelles as well. Even though they sound very simple, they can cause a lot of damage to you. No, sometimes we die from bacterial infections, right? Like anang inyong kuan, tuberculosis, kana siya, which is caused by your Mycobacterium tuberculosis, as worse as that, or as simple as like a strep infection, yeah, caused by your streptococcus, what do you call that? Kanang sa strep throat. I forgot, but kana siya, genus Streptococcus na siya. So these are the three domains of life. And then magkuha na din na siya, mag-drop down na din na siya to phylum, etc., kingdom. So I hope you still remember that. We will not talk about that today. And then, of course, these cells, the cells of the three domains of life, they have three basic requirements. No, all cells will have the same thing. So all cells should naadyo sila ani. So number one, all cells will need, or all cells have, one way or another, a cell membrane. What this cell membrane is composed of will depend on what kind of cell it is. Like for example, kita mga animals, no, our cells, our cell membranes, or even the cell membrane of plants, our cell membranes are composed of your phospholipid bilayer, and then the cell membrane of your I forgot what I was gonna say. Anyways, may nag-drift akong brain. Okay, inana ang cell membrane, no? So it's mainly composed of like cholesterol. It's mainly composed of phospholipids. So that's your cell membrane. So without the cell membrane, anything could go into the cell or anything could go out of the cell. Or better yet, if there's no cell membrane at all, there will be no cell. Mora dun na siya. Okay, the second one. All cells will have a cytoplasm, which is composed of your cytosol. Cytosol is basically the liquid or the substance that composes your cytoplasm. It is not only water, of course not. It has solutes in it. It depends on what kind of cell it is. No, wala siya. It depends on what kind of cell it is. It has like um any kind of solute that is. That's cytoplasm. And third, all cells will have one way or another DNA or hereditary coding. Unsa may essence sa cell kung walay DNA, right? The essence of the cell, it's DNA, it's the instructions. It tells us how how many times your cell will divide. It tells us the even as much as the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, or even the propensity of you having this disease whatsoever. No, daghan kaayo siya ginaingon about ourselves. So that's what's amazing about DNA. Uh, the concept of DNA, like but we discovered the actual existence of DNA just recently, no? In the past, ano lang, in the like less than a century ago, mga 1950s, 1960s, kind of time. So the concept of DNA has been around for a long time. Like a lot of people are theorizing on it, but the what do you call this? The proof, the proof of the existence of DNA is pretty recent. Huh? 1950s na napita. So, ang DNA actually, the discovery of DNA, kuan na siya ang what do you call this? Ang pa-start jud ana, or why it was discovered or how it was discovered was because of murders. Yeah, that's the history of DNA. Because of murders. No? Sad kayo, no? So, katong first successful. Why am I talking about murders early in the morning? I'm sorry. But I just kuana ni siya kanang for your information because I love watching murder documentaries. I don't know. It makes me very paranoid, but I just love it. Anyway, so kato siya experimental pa to siya to the time that was in England, no? Experimental pa tong DNA nga kuan nga sequencing ato nga time. And then they found like a sample. There was a rape victim and they found a semen sample, and then they run it through, the DNA sequencing and also the kanang naman like kanang ibutang nga dye, ana ka mag-color man na siya, mag-gradient din na siya. It's really interesting. Very, very interesting. So they were looking for a match for that. So they had like suspects, and then they got their skin cells, swabs, kanang buccal swabs, kanina sa inside of your cheek. Then they got a match, and then dili pa sila sure, kaya di man sila sure kung sakto ba dyan lang gibuhat, no? And then the guy confessed. So that was really great. So dato nag-start ang use jud sa DNA, no, as proof of guilt. So yeah, amazing kapag discover sa DNA. Ayan. So we have here, this is a bacteria cell. It is very, very simple. Its structure is very simple. So this is a capsule bacteria cell. There are many kinds of bacteria cell when it comes to the shape, no? Different shapes imong bacteria, but this is like the representative of them all. The capsule nga bacteria. Mura siya kanang imong capsule na ginainom nimo. Thank you so much. Kanang mga antibiotics nimo. Oh, thank you so much antibiotics. So, your what do you call this? Your bacteria cell will have let's start sa katong pinakagawas nga part, no? Na kay of course its capsule, that's na actually protection, no? Tulo ka buko protection, its capsule and its cell wall. Ang kini nga cell wall, kining bacteria cell wall, it will be made of peptidoglycan. It's not the same as the cell wall that is found in your plant cells. It's not made of peptidoglycan. Lahi isa ng ila, no, sa plant cells, no. So sa cell wall sa bacteria, it's made of peptidoglycan, and then of course they will have your plasma membrane, which is basically very similar to the cell membrane of you. And then inside of it, naakay cytoplasm, of course, kani siya din ha. And then in the cytoplasm or floating in the cytoplasm would be your ribosomes, kini siya. Your ribosomes are responsible for protein synthesis. Ayan. Now, there are many, ganun kailangan mo mag-synthesize of protein ang bacteria. One of the uses of protein is actually the kayo use ang protein. No, protein is almost everywhere. If not everywhere, then almost everywhere. So, kining protein actually it will help the bacteria determine kinsa ang foreign o kinsa sad ang dili foreign. Mura kog kanang kita sad good ang ato ang cells so humans and also the animals will have presenting proteins, meaning kanang proteins nga naa sa gawas sa cell. Mura na siya it functions like an ID card, no? It functions like an identification card. It tells you if it is foreign or not to your own body. So inana si bacteria nasa siya inana. That's how sometimes our bodies can recognize what is foreign and what is not, no? So if this bacteria gets into our bodies and its protein is not recognizable, our immune system would say, oh, this is a foreign thing, we have to attack it. So ina na ang use sa ribosomes. So it is used for protein synthesis, and protein is used in a lot of things as well. Proteins are also used in the synthesis of DNA. Na siya. So ang imong bacteria kailangan sa nasa siya DNA, no? Kailangan na siya. It's in an area called the nucleoid. The nucleoid is not a nucleus. It's not. It's just a dense part of the bacteria cell that is packed with DNA. It's like a coiled part of the DNA, the coiled version of the DNA. Because think of the DNA. The DNA is like it's around 2 meters long, no? So for it to be enclosed in such a small cell, it needs to be coiled. No, murag ka na imong tanod ba nga kailangan siya i-coil para dili siya magkagubot-gubot. So, same gyud na siya ng analogy when it comes to your DNA inside your cell. So, that's it. So, your DNA, ang kailangan niya pa ang bacteria sa nasa DNA because muna siya yung goal, no? It needs to replicate its DNA, no? So, when it invades the animal cell, like for example, it invades a human cell, ang DNA niya mo replace sa DNA sa atoang own nga lawas. So that's how your bacteria is able to invade our bodies. And it is able to survive that way as well. Okay, so that is your DNA. And then, sa gawas sa imuhang sa gawas sa imuhang capsule, you have your pilus. Ang usa ka buok is pilus and the plural form is pilay. Ang kining pilay, pilay. Kining mong pilay, it is used for adhesion. Stick together, like if it wants to stick to your cell, it can do that. And also a little bit for mobility, for movement. And then sometimes your bacteria cell would have a flagellum or plural form So what is the flagellum for? It's for movement, no? Mona siya. This is for movement or mobility. We do have a cell in animals. We do have a cell that has a flagellum, and it's the only animal cell that has a flagellum. What animal cell is that? Huh? What animal cell? It's the only animal cell that has a flagellum. Anyone? I answer?
Sperm cell, ma'am.
Sperm cell. Correct. Okay. It's the only animal cell that has a flagellum. So, ang atong sperm kay kayod-kayod lang ta friend. Pag sulod niya sa vaginal canal, siya, ato na to sa egg cell. Ano siya? So, it needs to have the flagellum. Okay? So, that is it actually for this morning. We will continue with the animal and the plant cell tomorrow. And then that will be the first half of our lesson. And then we will continue on with what's the next topic. We will continue on with animal and plant tissues sa. I had din to mag cell cycle, okay? Animal and plant tissues, and then cell cycle din ta sa Wednesday. All right. Kayod. Yes, tinood Ryan, no? Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Please ask. If you're curious about something or something confuses you, let us enlighten ourselves dayon so that all of your classmates we will share it with the rest of your classmates. Are there any questions? You're so quiet. Basta sa question.
None so far, ma'am.
There's none po, ma'am.
Tinood. Charot. Sige.
Promise.
Promise. So, sige, go. All right. So that is it for this morning. We will continue with the rest of the lesson tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll be talking about what am I doing? We'll be talking about the animal and the plant cell, and then we'll continue on with animal and plant tissues. All right. So if there are no questions, let's end this morning session. And good luck on your next class. Kung our next class. Okay. So thank you very much for coming to our live session, to our class, and I'll see you again tomorrow, same time, yapon, and same link. Goodbye, STEM 4, and have a good day.
Bye.